Thank you guys for joining me. I'm Cornelia Gibson again, and this is the Abolitionist Table. Today, I want to take you down the history of why the Abolitionist Table was formed and what is the Abolitionist Table. I kind of said before that this table is an actual physical table called the Abolitionist Table that I had shipped from England a few weeks ago. So we'll talk about that, and I'll show you what the table looks like and kind of help you understand why I took the time to find it and have it shipped. But okay, so let me take you back. The Abolitionist Table was a thought, an idea, an organization actually that me and a couple of my friends had started as an organization. And the organization was like a national umbrella organization. It had the table in the name. And so we were going to do the Tennessee branch. And my wonderful friend Kimberly said, what about the Abolitionist Table? It stuck. It stuck because the purpose of our organization was really to have these conversations, to talk to people about anti-Blackness and talk about like freedom as a community, getting us to a better human condition. We put together, some workshops and some things internally to try to flesh things out. And unfortunately, it just really didn't work out for us. But the idea and the table, the name, it stuck with me. Because initially when Kim, came up with the idea, I went and I'm a researcher by nature. And so for me, I go down rabbit holes. And so I looked, is there such a thing as the Abolitionist Table? And it was. There was an Abolitionist Table that was created in England when slavery was being abolished in England. So I'm going to take you through some history. Full disclaimer. Most of the time when I'm talking, I'm going to refer to some type of history. I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar, but I am someone who has spent a lot of time searching for history, my history, your history. And not in a classroom, in books around us, in historical books, in things that I find that I have a question about, curiosity about, and I go look for it. So I have a lot of books. I've read a lot of books. I have a lot of books to read. But that's kind of what I'm always going to reference. I'm going to reference something about our history because it really does matter. It matters to know where you came from so that you can understand where you need to go, or at least the historical implications of where you can go. Right? Maybe that makes sense. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to say up front. I probably will put any of the historical references that I'm talking about in the comments, or I'll pin them to my community wall, or I'll put them in the description, because I really want us to start digging into our own stories. We need to understand our own plights. You probably have heard of William Wilberforce, or maybe not. There's a school in Ohio that was named for him, and it's actually in Wilberforce, Ohio. It was the first college to be owned and operated by African Americans. That's a big deal. That's a big deal because all of our HBCUs don't have that type of history. But this one did. This man, William Wilberforce, was a force of his own in Britain for abolishing slavery. That was his plight. So he and this other man named John Newton kind of joined forces to set out to abolish slavery in Britain and the world. So we were talking about William Wilberforce and John Newton. So John Newton, you probably know, maybe, he penned the spiritual Amazing Grace. All of us know about Amazing Grace if you grew up in a Black church. That song was my mom's favorite song. And my goodness, it evokes a lot of emotion when you hear it, or when it's sung in our churches. That's the song that John Newton penned. And he penned that song after his leaving the slave trade as a ship's captain and became a minister and had this conversion into evangelical Christianity. And John Newton and William Wilberforce were mates, I guess you could say. John Newton was a mentor, if you will, and he was the pastor of William Wilberforce. So in both of their conversions in this Christian faith, they decided to take on slavery. So Wilberforce was a part of Parliament, and he spent the bulk of his life, his literal life, trying to abolish slavery. From 1789 to 1807, he was putting forth bills in Parliament to abolish slavery in some form or another. And in 1807, he got the Slave Trade Act. The Slave Trade Act put a dent into slavery in Britain, but it wasn't completely abolishing slavery as he and John Newton envisioned it to be. That didn't happen until 1833. He had already spent the bulk of his life on this plight to abolish slavery in Britain. So much so that the Slavery Abolitionist Act of 1833 was passed on July 26th. He died on July 29th, 3 days after that act was passed. That is a testimony to a life well lived. Though it was abolished in Britain, it was 30 years later, and a war had to happen before it was abolished here in the United States. But that's some history. That's just a little history. So this table in England, let me get back to the table. This table was created in England, in Britain, as a testament to say, we stand with you. Abolish slavery. Slavery isn't good. And there's a crest, and I'll show it. I'll show you the crest where it says abolish slavery around this British crest here. This is why I got this table. The history of this table represented so much that I said, hey, I gotta have one, because I want to be able to have something physical that has the history of something that we need to do that was actually already done. So we're not talking about abolishing slavery the physical bodies of slavery right now. We're talking about other things that were left. Because with 400 years of chattel slavery, which is different than biblical slavery, that's one of the questions that people often bring up. Well, slavery was part of life. Slavery was about winners and losers. Slavery was part of the Bible. But the slavery that was part of the Bible and the slavery that our ancestors in Africa understood, or at least I'm hoping that they understood, was not the same slavery that our bodies were sold to. It was not the same. There was no indentured servitude where you could work yourself out of slavery. There was no decency that was provided to our ancestors as far as, how they worked, when they worked, how they were treated. None of that happened in chattel slavery. And so that's the difference. So what do we have slavery of now? We have slavery of our minds. That's the biggest thing. Slavery of our hearts, slavery of our spirit. That's one of the reasons why I created the Abolitionist Table. That's one of the reasons I want to have these conversations. That's one of the reasons that I'm talking to you right now. Because even with the history that I just kind of ran through quickly, that's a lot of years, guys. That's a lot of years that we were in this bondage, and that reverberates in our own DNA. It's called epigenetics. Just because the time has passed doesn't mean the spirit has. And so we need to, as a community, talk about some of these things that are carryovers or leftovers that we need to possibly get rid of. Like the one time we were free or free-ish, the essence of freedom was during Reconstruction, right? Like that's from 1865 to 1877. That's when a bulk of laws were passed in the Reconstruction period. That's when you got public school education for everybody. And that was thankfully to a lot of us, or the remnants of systemic slavery are here right now in 2025, right here, right now. And we need to get rid of them. We need to talk about what we need to get rid of. So let's do that. Let's have those conversations at this abolitionist table. Let's use the history that this table represents to abolish some things that we need to get rid of today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for tuning in. And you know what? Thank you for having an open mind. Because that's not something that we really are encouraged to do today. We're either one way or the other way. But somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle, there's a lot we can learn and unlearn. Welcome to the Abolitionist Table. We can wait